Republicans have a big advantage for 2022. Why? Gerrymandering, history, and Democrats' strategy or lack thereof. Welcome to the State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined, of course, by your friendly redneck liberal, Mr. Lance L. Jackson. And today we're looking at why Republicans have gained a heavy House of Representatives advantage for 2022. And if Democrats lose control of Washington, that they might have a long wait in front of them to ever regain it. There are three main things that we're going to look at as part of this: gerrymandering, what history tells us, and Democrats' strategy or a lack thereof. And in the last segment, we will talk about what might have to change, or rather summarize what we've mentioned throughout the show about what may have to change based on the way our system was set up and the way the system now actively works. There's a lot to talk about, but Lance, it just wouldn't be right to get started if you didn't give us the word of the day.
Well, the word of the day is 4 syllables, but I think it's one that Justin can win with. Gerrymander. Gerrymander. Named after a former governor of Massachusetts when the method was employed. It can be used as a verb or a noun, and it means to divide a voting area so as to give one political party a majority in as many districts as possible. Gerrymander.
I do suspect that I stand a reasonable chance today with this, although I'm not going to.
I did not gerrymander the event today. I gave it equal opportunity for both sides to win.
I don't know about that, but it sounds like what I told my brother when we were growing up. You know, I made sure that the rules were fair. I wrote the rules, but don't worry, they're fair. Sounds like what you're passing off right now. Yeah, I made sure it's fair today.
As we get into the show, I learned something today, that there are 2 forms of gerrymandering.
Yes. So we've got cracking and packing. And cracking is when map makers spread a cluster of a certain type of voters, for example, those affiliated with the opposing party, among several districts to dilute their vote. So think of this one, right, Lance, as we see an area that's heavily GOP, like 80-20, right? And the Democrats look at that sucker and say, well, you know, we don't want to give them a district here, so we're going to pull in a little sliver of this district into several other districts, kind of making it an epicenter, or cracking the stronghold, so to speak, right?
Exactly.
So that's the first type. Packing is when members of a demographic group, say black voters or voters in the opposing political party, are crammed into as few districts as possible. So we use Democrats as the bad ones on the first example. So in this one, we've got this Republicans looking at, you know, this area of black voters saying, yeah, we probably can't, given how we've drawn everything else, we probably can't crack the district. So let's pack it, right? Let's accept that we're going to lose this seat, but let's make sure that we make it 99% Democrat, you know, because, and you might say, well, why would one party ever do that and give another party a stronghold? Well, you know, you can have 2 strongholds as long as we have the other 13 districts, right?
Exactly.
And that's the difference between, we can have 13 of 15, or we could only have maybe 12 of 15 if we didn't do some packing. In other words, making areas so liberal that you're excluding the possibility that too many of them get lumped into some other district. And this is where you'll see in both examples, those crazy districts that have, you know, this big bulky area and then these thin little lines that run out from it in different directions, or that span these huge swaths, you know, of the geographic area. That's what you're seeing. Those are usually telltale signs of gerrymandering. And the 2 types, cracking and packing.
Yeah, I mean, a homework assignment for our listeners: use your phone or your computer, or when you get home, if you're listening on the radio as you're driving, you need to get out your state map, call it up, and look at how your districts in your state are drawn. Because that's one reason why it's called gerrymandering, is because where this was first done in Massachusetts, they drew a district in Essex County that looked like a salamander because they wanted to get the votes for a certain political candidate and a certain political party. So, look at your state and it's like, oh, well, we're, let's say a state like Ohio. It's a fairly regular shape, but there are no squares or circles on our state map. And I'm sure that your state, wherever you are, looks much the same, and it's like, well, wait a minute. We're divided into counties or parishes. So it's probably just, these 2 counties or these 3 parishes make up a voting district. And I think you'll be surprised when you look and say, oh my gosh, there are parts of 8 different counties in my voting district. And I don't have anything in common with these people. These people live in the city and I live in the middle of a cornfield. Well, why didn't they just take all of us that live in the cornfield and make us a district? Yeah, folks, that's what we're talking about. And notice, I'm not mentioning Democrats or Republicans. I'm just saying we're in power. We want to stay in power. Both groups do this, okay? And that's where we are. And then it just makes it devolves into the fact that we don't pay attention to this gerrymandering that is going on. And then we wonder why we have these fights and these disparities in our state and national governments.
I think if you look, Ohio's map has a great example of 2 or 3 of these ultra wonky districts, particularly Ohio's 9th congressional district. So if you have a phone handy and you're not driving, look up Ohio's 9th congressional district. Just type that into Google and you're going to see this crazy sliver of a district that runs along the Great Lake up on the northern edge of Ohio. It does not contain one whole county anywhere. There is not a single part of it that is one county geographically. It is a very bizarre looking district. And I'm not sure, it would be really hard as a representative for that district to keep track of what your district is or looks like. That's a good example in Ohio. The other one that does not contain, doesn't contain one single whole county are districts 11, 13, and 3, none of which have one whole county under their jurisdiction. They are all, weird looking lines, squiggle lines all over the place. So as to do cracking and packing, right? And that is.
And you see examples of both on this map. And what I'm saying is, folks, we're all about politics or local. So, Justin said to call up Ohio and you can look at an example and it's a very colorful map. So it's easy to see the districts, but I'm sure your state has something like that as well. And you need to look it up because all politics being local, you need to know what your state's doing.
The other thing that's crazy here to think about is, for example, our 6th congressional district contains 15 whole counties and then 14 whole counties and then 3. So a total of 17 counties, no less, that it can count under its jurisdiction. I mean,
out of the 88, so almost 1/5 of Ohio's counties are in one district.
Right.
Out of 15.
And part of what's crazy about that is the geographic span of that area is immense. I mean, just the time that it takes to get from the southernmost point of that district to the northernmost point of that district. That's, I'm not sure how, given especially that part of it's like southern, very southern Ohio, and the other part is like northeastern Ohio. Boy, that would be a tricky.
Well, as you look at it, at
represent.
least 6 other districts touch it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So it's like we're surrounding you.
Yeah. It's but the point is, to Lance's point, you need to look at this stuff because this is a huge determining factor. And we say, why might Democrats lose, or rather, why do Republicans have a big edge going into the 2022 midterms? Well, it's because if you didn't know, your congressional districts are redrawn based on the census every 10 years. And what just happened in 2020? The census happened. Now, the census results were much delayed, but earlier this summer in 2021, everybody started to draw their new districts or propose their new districts. And then you might say, well, who gets to draw these districts, Lance? Who's responsible?
Well, here's the other fun fact, right? Every state is different. Da-da-da-da-da-da! So again, when our founding fathers gave power to the states and split the power between the state governments and the national government, the drawing of congressional districts was left to each state. So the majority of states let the state legislature do it. But there are also states that have independent commissions. There are states that have bipartisan groups that do it. And there are states that have non-political entities do it for them. So again, check and see, what does your state do? Because there is not one rule or one group that does this in all 50 states. Every state gets to do it however they voted to take their census numbers and divide it into the number of House seats that they get based on the new census numbers every 10 years.
Now, wait a minute, because it sounds to me like this could happen anywhere, not just Republican states. It could happen in Democratic ones too, right? So why are you guys saying that this is a big advantage for the Republicans? Well, the reason is, as we've talked about many times, Republicans like to win. And so they have been slowly working the last 30 or 40 years to take control of state legislatures, because they happen to know that in this country, more than we realize, the real power lies in controlling the individual state governments. If you can do that, then you can do the next big thing, which is control the federal government, even when you're in the minority when it comes to popular vote. And that's the big key. I mean, that's part of why they've been investing in this. And here's what it boils down to, folks. This is just, again, this is raw data. You can go find this for yourself, and we've got the article linked at thestateofus.org. But this is just fact. Republicans have control over the redistricting process in states that represent 187 congressional seats, compared with just 84 for Democrats. The rest are to be drawn by outside panels or are in states where the two parties must agree on maps or have them decided by the courts. So of the ones where gerrymandering absolutely exists right now through state legislatures, Republicans control 187 congressional seats compared with 84 for Democrats.
A better than 2-to-1 advantage.
Yes.
And they're not breaking, folks, they're not breaking the law. They're not breaking any rules.
It's legal.
They've learned how to play the game, and it's given them a 2-to-1 advantage in those areas where this is allowed. Just a fact. It's not pointing fingers. It's just a fact. That's just the way it is.
So from a purely strategic standpoint, obviously Republicans have that advantage. Things have drastically ticked up in the map drawing wars, so to speak, since the 2010 GOP wave across the country. And that also saw us, as we know, that saw the rise of the Tea Party and other strongholds like that. So they had been building it for a while, and then they were ready to deploy it into action when it was time. And now what Democrats have decided to do as a way to fight back is just do the same thing, because the article points out that, in fact, in our great state of Virginia, Democrats are actively working to get it right on drawing out a Republican district altogether. I mean, literally getting rid of a representative by essentially eliminating his district. Now, they're keeping the district technically, but the way they're drawing it, it will be impossible for that Republican to win that district. And Virginia it's kind of the opposite of Ohio, where it goes the other way. Most of their congressional districts are Democratic.
And the Republicans are doing it in Iowa, North Carolina, Texas, and Montana.
Right.
So, again, both sides are playing this game, and you say, well, what does it mean to me? Stay tuned. We'll explain how this affects all of us.
And the next thing we have to look at is why Democrats might have a long wait in store if they lose control of Washington. So we're telling you that it's likely, right, that just from a gerrymandering standpoint, that Republicans could take back the House. But what does history tell us too? Because there's a few things in favor of the Republicans. To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. Even if there was no gerrymandering, there's still this pesky thing out there. It's called history. And for some, they love it. For others, they hate it. But the reality is, it is what it is. And in this case, history tells us that if the Democrats lose control of Washington, which is likely, historically speaking, because if you've been a long-time listener to this show or you pay attention to politics, you would know that most midterm elections after a presidential election tend to favor the opposing party of the president. So in other words, let's rewind real quick, right, to 2008. Barack Obama's elected. 2010, Republican wave, right? They take control of the House and the Senate. And then we fast forward to Trump, right? 2016. He gets control of all three branches of government. The Republicans do. And then 2018, what happens? Democrats take back control of the House, right? And then 2020, we elect Joe Biden. Democrats get all three branches or all three bodies of government, right? They control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. And then what's going to happen in 2022? Well, again, more often than not, history tells us that regardless of what good old President Joe Biden has done, the Republicans stand a pretty good chance of taking it back. And why, Lance? Why is that? Why do voters tend?
Well, that's the question, right? I mean, only one president in the last 70 years has figured out how to regain
only one
control.
Wow.
And that was Harry S. Truman.
Your guy.
Right. From Missouri, the show me state.
You're from Missouri, right?
I am from Missouri.
For listeners that don't know?
That's
okay.
Where I was born and raised and consider my roots. Yes. Even though I have spent the majority of my life in Ohio, home is Missouri. But, I don't know. I think it's basically because we as Americans tend to say, well, we didn't like what was going on, so we're going to vote you in. Oh, well, we don't like what you're doing, so now we're going to vote this other group in. And it's just the way we do things. We're not satisfied for very long. And so therefore we are given the choice to pick new leaders, and we do, and I think that's just very typical when you give people the chance to vote for change, they do so. And, when you elect a new House of Representatives every 2 years, it basically means, you get that opportunity. And so, yeah, we voted you in. We like some of what you do, but yeah, your approval rating, which historically drops, you're given your grace period when you win the election, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. And after about 3 to 6 months, people start to say, yeah, we really don't like what you're doing. Oh, wow. Hey, in 6 months, we get to kind of vote on how we feel about you. We don't get to vote you, but we get to vote on your political party. And we've kind of lost interest in you. You're either not doing enough or you're doing too much. So therefore, it's kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. This porridge is too hot. This porridge is too cold. This porridge is just right. You've got 2 out of the 3 are negatives. So people do that when they vote in the midterm elections.
It is a paradox when it comes to how Americans feel about change. They find themselves in a paradox. And what I'm getting at there is, we get all riled up, right? We've had a president for 8 years or 4 years or whatever. And, we're ready for something new, and somebody comes along and they've got these ideas. And again, we could get into the weeds about whether or not those ideas really matter at all in terms of people's excitement, or if it's just, we've gotten bored, right? Yeah, we had Obama for 8 years. If he had run again, maybe he wins. I don't know. We're kind of tired of him. Kind of tired. Somebody else, give us something new, something exciting. Well, something exciting came along, right? And so we got the change. Change, baby. We love it. And then you get a year or two in and it's like, I don't really know if we like this change. We thought we wanted change. We started getting change and it was like, ooh, it's a lot of change. It's too much change. I'm not saying right or wrong, just saying I think that that's part of what happens is we think we have an appetite for change. We get the change and then we realize that, well, I don't like the taste of the change isn't as sweet as I thought it was going to be. So now we're going to do something different. And again, history backs up this as Americans think they want to plow forward, and rarely in our history do we allow a party to plow for more than 2 to 4 years at a time.
Well, and it didn't make as much of a difference over the last 70 or 80 years because there was something called bipartisanship.
Oh.
And
so you could still do things even if everybody didn't agree.
You could still get things accomplished. You go back to President Bill Clinton and, his fights with Newt Gingrich, the Speaker of the House, the Republican, and Gingrich trying to shut down the government, and that kind of working against the Republicans, which then forced them to come back and work with Clinton, and with Clinton moderating some of his more liberal ideas to try to get some things accomplished. The same thing happened to even in the first term of President Obama, even though there was a real backlash, he was able to work a little bit with the Republicans to get some things done. But by his second term, that was all out the window, and we're not even close to any of it. Again, we just don't see working across the aisles, which has made then these midterm elections even more important. Because if you don't control both houses of Congress and the presidency, the likelihood of anything getting done is slim and none. Hence what we call gridlock.
And the other thing the article points out is that even if all of this history doesn't hold true, it's a razor thin margin that they hold them all by anyway, right? So even if you just make a little bit better case to some swing voters in some key states, even if there was no gerrymandering, and even if this history didn't say this is what it was, you'd probably still have, again, a really tricky path just to maintain your margins, just because of the sentiment, generally speaking, of Americans liking to change it up, right? And then not liking the change. But, again, that's about as American as it gets, right? This is what we want, and then we get it, and then we don't want it anymore. But that aside, that component, coupled with the component of the very narrow margin by which they were able to secure the Senate and the House, makes holding them all the more difficult, because you're almost guaranteed to lose seats, right? If for no other reason than just the sheer change for change's sake, right? And then if you throw in the gerrymandering and the small margin, and it's like, well, they'd really have to pull.
They're going to need to pull a rabbit out of the hat for the Democrats to
a couple rabbits,
because it's a very slim margin in the House, and the Senate, if they can get all 50 Democrats on board, then the tie has to be broken by the vice president. So it's about the slimmest of margins as you could have for, quote, air quotes here, controlling all the branches of the government.
Right. Well, in the Senate, it is by definition the slimmest margin you can have and still have control.
You have President Biden continuing to govern as the Democratic president of the United States, but he has to go to a Republican-controlled Congress to get laws passed.
There are people that I think would be less suited for that. I'm not saying I'm optimistic about him getting a lot done, but I'm also not. There's not a lot of other people. Let me put it this way. There's not a lot of other people that are alive, Republican or Democrat, that I would put in that position and expect them to do much. I think I think there's a relative chance that Joe Biden will still attempt and probably succeed at getting one or two things done, even if the Republicans control things. Now, that all depends on whether or not the Republicans are willing to do anything too, because they know that strategically speaking, the best thing for them to do, right, is win back the House, take back the House right now, hold up everything, even things they agree with, hold them up and stand on principle and cry wolf and on, because then when you get to the 2024 election, they have this whole thing of, we stood up to Joe Biden for the last 2 years and, he's not gotten anything done despite the fact that there were several things that we would have, gladly worked on. And now it's time to give us control again. I mean, that's not like Republican. I mean, that's what you do. That's the strategy.
You looked into your crystal ball and that's what's going to happen?
Again, if I was betting, that seems the most likely. I hope that I'm wrong, because I don't think that that's ideal. And that's what we're going to talk about coming up, Lance, is all of this seems really doom and gloom. I mean, because it's just going to the cycle just continues, right? The Republicans do this, they get the presidency back at some point, right? I mean, whether it's in another couple of years or whether it's after that, after Biden's 8 years are up, whatever, whenever they get the presidency back, then it flips over and the Democrats are going to try the same thing, and on it rolls, right? We're just making the sausage, just churning it out, baby. Don't care what's in it. Don't care how it looks. Not sure if it complies with regulation. Just get it out. Just get it out. Put it on the shelf. And the question is, does it have to be that way? And how did it get this way? Because, I mean, surely Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, George Washington, was this what they were thinking? What happened? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, George Washington, Ben Franklin. Who else should we mention, Lance?
James Madison.
Nah.
What do you mean? Father of the Constitution.
Yeah, James Madison. I guess he could be in there.
Wow, a hater.
We got to mention Alexander Hamilton, right?
You can. I don't have to.
No, I'd rather not. Despite the musical. So, those people, is this really what they envisioned happening? I mean, as time went on?
Yes. I mean, it is. That's what people don't realize. I mean, I think so. Very simple answer. Yes, this is exactly what they wanted. They took all the power and they split it between the federal government, the national government, and the states. And this is exactly what they wanted, because they feared a king. They feared a dictator. They didn't want one person to become too powerful.
They did want the power split up this way. I guess the other question is, do you think they wanted gerrymandering?
Well, yeah, they didn't want the power. I mean, Jefferson, right? He didn't want the power in the federal government. He did everything he could to give states the power. That was what he was all about until he became president. Then, of course, he
expanded the powers of the presidency.
He made the biggest land purchase in the history of the United States when he really didn't have the power to do that.
The irony there, of course, is that he was also somebody that regularly argued that if it doesn't say you can do it, then you shouldn't be doing it. Because there is that nice clause, right, in the Constitution about anything not mentioned in this Constitution, those powers should be reserved to
my
states.
point is, we put our founding fathers on a pedestal, like they did everything just perfectly and only had the best interest of the people in mind when they did it. And they were politicians as well. And they did things to make sure that they stayed in power and that things were done the way they wanted to. They were, and please, I mean, again, send us your ideas, send us your thoughts on, to podcast@thestateofus.org. But sometimes we look at them as faultless, and they weren't. They weren't by a long shot.
They were people. And one thing that I think we don't talk about is not enough is that, there had to be, right, a little bit of narcissism going on here, because, the audacity to stand up to, at the time, the world's most powerful empire and say, yeah, we don't want to do it that way. We're going to do our own thing because we don't like you. There's a little bit, right, of self-importance there and thinking that you know best. And again, they gave us a very interesting form of government as a result of all that. So I'm not saying that they didn't either, but to Lance's point, there was also some, and that's what we see right with Jefferson as well. I don't want other people to do those things, but if I'm in that position, I can trust myself to do those things. And I think the hard thing to foresee with gerrymandering, and I mentioned this to Lance before the show, is they lived in such a different world than we do in respect to the practicality of a federal government, right? Yes, they created it. Yes, it existed. But a lot of governing, the vast majority of things that affected day-to-day people's lives was handled locally because it had to be, because it just wasn't, and this is, we talk about, I gave the example of militias. Everybody, when we roll out the gun debate, talks about, that our founding fathers, even the liberal ones, thought that militias were important. Okay, well, the reason they thought they were important, there were no telephones. There was no standing army most of the time. So if some invader landed on the shore, which was basically your 13 colonies, right? Somebody just comes out of nowhere. There's no radar, no advanced warning, right? That when you know that they're coming is if you get lucky and see the flag out there on the horizon on the mast of the ship, right? Like that's when you know that they're coming. That's the advanced notice you get. So if you don't have guns, if you don't have a militia, there ain't no federal government that's going to come protect you. You had to protect yourself. That was the only option, right? So they looked at it as saying, some of the other world's great empires, and arguably part of the fall even of the British Empire, was there was too much central strength and too little ability for local government to take action without the blessing of the strong government.
And I don't disagree with you, and I know you're really big on, all government being local, and you weave that into most of the shows, and it makes sense to me. But I've got one for you, okay? How do we stop the gerrymandering? How do we get rid of this? And you know that I'm usually not one for big change, right? But here it is. And I just want, before we end today, I want to get your reaction to this one, because I think for me, it is a big change, okay? Let's just, and I'm raw numbers here, and I'm going off the top of my head as I'm listening to you here. But let's say we know Ohio has 15 representatives under the current 2020 census. And let's assume that Donald Trump won 60% of the vote in Ohio in the 2020 election. So therefore, 60% of 15 is 9. So we should get 9 representatives from Ohio who are Republicans and 6 who are Democrats. Base it on the percentage of votes that the party candidates received in the presidential race. So there you go. And I know we're running out of time, and you may have to address that later, but
okay.
I'm your friendly redneck liberal is always like, yeah, this kind of stay the course. I don't like to change things. There you go. Just get rid of gerrymandering by basing it off of the percentage of the party that won that state in a presidential election year.
And I thought it was 15 too, but there are 16 representatives in the state of Ohio right now. Two senators, 16 representatives. So
okay.
Fun fact. Because we had this problem before when we looked at it. It used to be 18, And it went
way back in the day, it was 19.
Well, okay, well, yeah.
Or it was 21 when I was in high school. So yeah, we were back in the dark ages when we were, the Pony Express was sending us, giving us our results. It was 21 and 2 and 23 total for Ohio.
Well,
and I know we're, so we're quickly running out of time, but there you go. That let me know what you think, folks. Is that a great idea or not?
I guess. I mean, I think that one requires additional time to address, but
no thought. Let's just do it. Let's either yes or no, thumbs up, thumbs down. Well, that's what you always do to me.
Yeah.
It's always like, what do you think of this? And I'm like, well, no. And you go, well, you never pick a side. Well, yeah. I just gave you one. There you go.
I guess my initial
I can get rid of gerrymandering.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I think there's huge problems with this of like, how are these representatives going to be chosen? I mean, great, you get, however
we'll
many
Republicans. We'll go back to the old days.
Who elects them? And
the state gets to decide. I mean, that's what we did. That's what we did. We just, write a constitutional amendment to take out the 17th Amendment, the direct election of senators. And we'll just say, everything's picked by the state house.
Well, wait a minute, Lance. You're telling me that we didn't always vote on senators? That's not how that worked?
No, we didn't. For the majority of our history, it was just appointed by the governor of the state.
Oh.
Or the state legislature.
Interesting. Okay. Well,
again, depending on what your local state
you could even
do.
make an argument there that helps encourage local participation in government. Because if the state is the one that is going to decide who your representatives are,
you take more of an interest in your state and local government.
State. Right.
Yeah.
But that was the point that I was getting at.
Exactly. I'm supporting your point.
Yes. Is that is part of why we've gotten to where we are, is because most people don't have any idea. I mean, we figured out before the show, Lance didn't know who our state, senator was. And
I'm very politically active, and I couldn't, off the top of my head, I couldn't name it.
And how many people out there listening to the show can name their state representative, state senator? How many can?
Not who's in Washington, who's sitting in your state capitol.
Exactly. And you mean there's a right? There's some people out there. There's some people. We have a state House of Representatives. Yes, we all have been trained to believe that it happens at the federal level, but the place that the decisions are getting made that determine who's in the federal government, those are in the states. So there's your why Democrats may be out of power for a while and why they're likely to lose the 2022 midterms. So why do we have this conversation today, Lance?
Well, because we love politics, and also because True Chat's mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And I believe we've done that, and hopefully you've enjoyed today's show. And when you're talking to people around the water cooler or at Thanksgiving, and they say, well, where are you listening to all this interesting stuff? You can tell them it's The State of Us, and you can find it as a podcast on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
You can hear The State of Us Tuesdays and Thursdays as a podcast, first thing in the mornings, and in select AM and FM talk radio markets around the country. For The State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to Bradley Butch, producer extraordinaire, and thank you, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.